Radio. You're listening to 1680 The Crow.
Good afternoon, I'm Seamus Page with your 1 p.m. news and sports update. The BCIT Recreation Services are hoping to motivate students to hit the gym with a contest for consistent visits. Jacob New has the story.
The Consistency Challenge is back, with the aim to reward individuals for being physically active on campus. Staff are hoping it incentivizes students to drop into the Burnaby Rec Center more frequently. 3 visits and use of the facilities a week gets a student 1 entry into a prize draw. They can also get a bonus entry by bringing a friend along that hasn't registered in the contest. With winter weather and temperature sticking around, the Recreation Center gives students many different options in staying active, from using the fitness center to drop-in sports like badminton. The initiative runs from February 6th to March 3rd. Jacob New, 1680, The Crow.
The VPD are investigating a homicide in Vancouver's Chinatown neighborhood. Investigators have released few details, however, they do say the unidentified man was found on the street close to the Sun Yat-sen Classical Chinese Garden shortly after midnight. Sergeant Steve Addison says the man was already dead by the time the officers arrived. As of right now, no arrests have been made. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team have also taken over the investigation of a dead woman and a critically injured man in Surrey. The 2 individuals were found as a fire crews answered an alarm at a Surrey apartment. The survivor sustained life-threatening injuries, and at the moment, police say that the public is not at risk from the incident. Members of IHIT are trying to see if the tripped alarm and sprinklers are linked to the case. The Vancouver City Council is to review recommendations for a $2.8 million grant that focuses on mental health and law enforcement. The goal of the program would be to pair police officers with mental health workers. Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim says $2.5 million of the funding will go towards hiring 58 new mental health workers. Sim states that Vancouver's annual grant to the Health Authority will grow to $8 million, and Sim's party, the ABC, was elected on promises to hire 100 more police and an equal number of mental health nurses to address public safety concerns. BC politicians are poised to return to the legislature today. As they return, the NDP will present its agenda for the coming months. This will start with a speech from the throne. Premier David Eby says the speech will outline priorities of healthcare, housing, public safety, and the economy. He says economists are predicting a potential recession and is focused on keeping the economy strong by building trade relationships and supporting businesses. Premier David Eby will be heading to Ottawa today to meet with premiers across Canada. The goal is to discuss a potential deal to increase federal health funding. They are calling on the federal government to boost its contributions through the Canada Health Transfer. Prime Minister Trudeau has invited premiers to meet on Tuesday to work out a funding agreement. The premiers have demanded that the federal government increase its share of healthcare spending from 22% to 35%. They hope for the increase to come with no strings attached. However, Ottawa has insisted that there must be accountability measures. The BC Real Estate Association is predicting that the province's property sales will drag on throughout the year. However, they do expect a strong rebound in 2024. Association Chief Economist Brendan Ogmundson placed the blame on a slowing economy and rising mortgage rates. The forecast predicts that the sales will dip by 7.1% this year before surging by 24% in 2024. Despite the dip, it is predicted that rates should stay relatively flat throughout the year. Residents in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody are concerned about a proposal to consolidate airplanes arriving along designated paths. The concern is that it puts a lot of air traffic over their communities. The proposed airspace modernization project by NAV Canada aims to make invisible highways in the sky with their new plan. Residents could experience noise levels above 60 decibels if paths are streamlined like this. Google has said that Canadian employees who are affected by the recently announced job cuts are being told today if they are being laid off. Google Canada spokesperson Lauren Skelly would not say how many people are being laid off. However, she did say that Canada remains an important market for Google. The U.S. military is releasing more information on the downing of a suspected Chinese spy balloon. Alex Stone has more.
NORAD Commander General Glenn Van Herk telling reporters there was a warhead in the missile that was used to destroy the balloon. The shot was taken about 6 miles off the coast. The balloon, he said, was about 200 feet tall, the payload about the size of an airliner, weighing a few thousand pounds, which came into play with worry about shooting it down over land.
So glass off of solar panels, potentially hazardous material.
He said they didn't know if there were explosives on board for the Chinese to destroy the spy technology before the U.S. could get to it. Alex Stone, EBC News.
The Canadian government has announced a $46.5 million plan for deep-sea research. Fisheries Minister Joyce Murray says the understanding of marine environments is relatively meager.
It's imperative that Canada better understand our oceans in terms of how they're changing, how we can support their ecosystems, and how we can sustainably manage resources.
Speaking at a conference in the International Marine Protected Areas Congress, Murray says the investment will allow Canada to get a better idea of how the ocean ecosystem is changing. The hope is to figure out how to successfully manage resources amongst these changes. The funding will come from the government's $3.5 billion Ocean Protection Plan. Hong Kong's top court has ruled that full reassignment surgery is no longer necessary for transgendered individuals to have their gender changed on their ID. Ed Donahue has more.
Transgender activist Henry Edward C. was born a biological female, but identified themselves as male.
We can finally live a dignified life in our home.
C decided not to have full sex reassignment surgery.
I can't go to the male bathroom, and it would be considered a crime of loitering if I use the female bathroom.
The court in Hong Kong ruled the government's policy was unconstitutional and imposed an unacceptably harsh burden on people who are transgender.
We will not be refused to enter Hong Kong because of the ID. We will have the basic right to enter heterosexual marriages and to start a family like everyone else in Hong Kong.
C says many transgender people in Hong Kong have been longing for a final victory for years. I'm Ed Donahue.
New York was hit by its strongest earthquake in 24 years today. Julie Walker has more.
The U.S. Geological Survey reports a 3.8 earthquake hit the Buffalo area around 6:15 a.m. The county executive tweeted it felt like a car hit his house. The shaking lasted a few seconds. Seismologist Yarab Altawil says it's not unusual.
Pre-existing fault lines and pre-existing fractures throughout the geological time, when they get activated, that caused an earthquake.
The earthquake occurred hours after a 7.8 quake hit Turkey.
It's a coincidence. They are not related.
The seismologist says earthquakes happen all the time, every day.
Think of earthquakes like car accidents. You only hear about the most devastating one.
Altawil says the Buffalo and Turkey quakes were the strongest to hit the areas since records have been kept. Julie Walker, New York.
More than 2,700 people have been killed and thousands more injured after an earthquake of 7.8 magnitude hit Turkey and Syria early Monday morning. Our reporter Shivani Joshi has more.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted early Monday morning saying his thoughts are with everyone affected by the earthquake and that Canada stands ready to provide assistance. Southeastern Turkey and northern Syria are currently experiencing power, water, and internet outages and poor weather conditions. The area is still experiencing aftershocks as well. According to experts, this is one of the worst earthquakes the region has seen. Shivani Joshi, 1680, The Crow.
The earthquake struck near the Turkey and Syrian border and has hit millions of displaced Syrians. Now on to our weather for today. The weather today is set to be mostly cloudy. However, there is a rainfall warning for Metro Vancouver tonight over Howe Sound, Squamish, and parts of Metro Vancouver. The warning is for the rainfall could reach up to 55 millimeters as of tonight.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow.
Everything everything is changing to digital. Everything is online. People aren't just waiting for the 6 o'clock news anymore. People want their news right now. They want to be able to go onto their smartphone, onto the internet, and see the news that they want to see.
Vancouver is growing at, a really rapid rate, the Lower Mainland even, and with the tools that we're given here, we're able to cover all of that.
Welcome to BCIT Magazine. I'm Radhika Sikakane.
In the program, they really leave it up to you. I mean, the help is there when you need it, figuring out how to use the programs like Premiere, Audition, and figuring out how to use the cameras. But it's up to you to sort of experiment and figure out what you can do when you go out in the field.
They brought candles and flowers to remember the student who lost her life yesterday.
Theresa May says the international community condemns Moscow.
They really make sure that you know the basics and you are able to put out a quality product.
I'm Brady Tretanero.
And I'm Radhika Sikakane. Thank you for tuning in to BCIT Magazine.
This is sports on 1680 The Crow.
Now on to our sports update. The Vancouver Canucks play tonight against the New Jersey Devils. This will be their first game without Bo Horvat as their captain. Horvat was traded to the Islanders on January 30th. Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes will be stepping up as new alternative captains alongside JT Miller and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. The WHL's Vancouver Giants have raised $10,000 at an auction following Nickelodeon theme night. With more on the story, Evan Tate.
The Giants' custom Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle jerseys were available for auction following Sunday evening's game against the Tri-City Americans, with proceeds going to BC Children's Hospital. Overaging forward Sammy May's jersey was able to raise the most money, totaling $460 for his jersey alone. Sammy May speaks on the high-priced uniform.
Feels really amazing. Yeah, I don't really know what to say, but I'm really surprised my jersey actually went for the highest. But it feels amazing for a great cause.
The Giants will play host to Nickelodeon Nights for 2 more seasons, after a partnership between the WHL and RE/MAX to support Children's Miracle Network. Evan Tate, 1680, The Crow.
We're now joined by our reporter, Evan Tate. Evan, are the Giants the only team doing a Nickelodeon night?
Thank you, Seamus. No, Nickelodeon Nights are a league-wide thing in which every Canadian team must host one. Not every team is going with the Ninja Turtles like the Giants, though. Teams have a choice between others like SpongeBob SquarePants, Paw Patrol, Blue's Clues, amongst others.
Which player had the highest selling jersey at the event?
Well, behind Sammy May at $460, team captains Ty Thorpe and potential NHL draft pick Samuel Honzek had the second and third highest, both reaching over $400. The highest selling jersey of the night, however, was a blank number 19 jersey, which sold for $470.
Thank you, Evan. The Arizona Cardinals wide receiver announced his retirement today, AJ Green. This comes after playing 11 seasons for both the Bengals and Arizona Cardinals. He retires as a 7-time Pro Bowler. The Premier League has accused Manchester City of being misleading of its finances for almost a decade. The league released a list of about 80 alleged breaches of its financial rules.
This is the result of a Premier League investigation that's been going on for more than 4 years. The Premier League accused Man City of breaching their financial rules more than 100 times over 9 years between 2009 and 2018.
Consequences for these actions by Manchester City could include instances of suspension, point deduction, replay matches, and even potentially an expulsion from the Premier League. This has been your 1 o'clock news and sports update. I'm Seamus Page with 1680 The Crow.
Stay tuned for more on BCIT's 1680 The Crow. Now it's time for the comment.
The NBA and NBA Players Association have been in talks of lowering the draft age eligibility from 19 to 18. This means that high school players could make the jump straight to the NBA. With the league prioritizing player development more and more, this could be even more successful than when it's been done in the past. High school athletes have not been able to be drafted since the 2005 draft. The age was originally changed as the NBA believed that high school players were immature as well as they weren't as polished as 19-year-olds. Since this change, the one-and-done path has been popularized by college athletes. One-and-done is when a player plays for a university for only a single season before declaring for the draft. In recent years, the NBA has implemented pathways such as entering the G League straight out of high school, which is the NBA's feeder league. This allows players to be paid for their talents while still remaining prevalent in scouting networks for the league. I believe this proposition would be beneficial for both the NBA and players. The NBA's median age has only dropped by 1 year as compared to the 2005 season. However, 12 of the 21 youngest NBA players to average 20-plus points in the NBA have came in the last 10 seasons. This highlights how willing the teams have become to trust young players, a trend which could continue if this proposal comes to fruition.
It's extremely important for people to stay healthy and to stay active as much as possible.
This is 1680 The Crow, and you're listening to our feature presentation.
When Pearl Harbor, was bombed, our lives turned upside down, and our journey into hell started at that time. We were crying and saying, Daddy, please come back.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen J.
And I'm Gula Sonova. Thank you for tuning in another episode of The Crow Chronicles. In this episode, we're going to talk about what happened to the Japanese Canadians during the World War II, especially here in Vancouver and on the grounds of Hastings Park, more commonly known as the Pacific National Exhibition or PNE.
That's right, Oogie. We'll be talking to Jim Kojima, a longtime Steveston resident and community organizer who knows a lot about the issues that Japanese Canadians face from when they first started immigrating to Canada in the 1800s.
We'll hear from Mary Kitagawa, who was imprisoned at Hastings Park when she was just 7. She's an educator, local human rights activist, and she also recently received an honorary doctorate from UBC for her activism.
And we'll also talk to Daniel Takawa, who is president of the Japanese Canadian Hastings Park Interpretive Center Society, who is leading the efforts to open a new interpretive center at Hastings Park.
So Jen, I think it's safe to say that almost everyone who lives in the Lower Mainland has been to the PNE at least once.
Yeah, Oogie, I love seeing the super dogs and the peg races, eating mini donuts, and maybe buying things I don't need at the show mart.
Me too, I'm all about the super dogs. But Jen, a few years ago I started noticing information plugs appearing around the PNE about Japanese Canadians being held there during World War II. I think you saw them too.
Yeah, I did. And when I saw those, I thought, we have to find out what this is about and do a podcast episode. So I'm really glad you were on board with this, and I'm excited to share what we learned. So let's start with why this happened in the first place.
Yeah, we spoke to a long-time local Steveston resident, Jim Kojima, who is in his mid-80s and still very involved as a community organizer in Richmond. He spoke about the Japanese Canadians' experience with the BC government in the pre-war years.
1907, Richmond
school board said that unless you own property in Richmond, your kids couldn't go to school.
And there was a big Japanese-Canadian fishing community in Steveston, Richmond, but they were facing a lot of discrimination too.
Because the Japanese were dominating the fishing industry, not only with numbers, but the number of fish they were catching, the Canadian government started to reduce the number of fishing licenses. And by 1923, it was reduced by, over the years, up to 50%.
Jim said it could have been worse for the fishermen if the local community hadn't stepped in.
In 1927, the BC government wanted to get rid of all the fishermen's licenses in 10 years, by 1937. And that didn't happen because the fishermen, the white fishermen and the canneries approached government and stopped it.
Wow, I'm so glad they had some allies even back then. So, Oogie, my inner nerd was curious, and I wondered what other barriers they had faced. And according to the online Canadian Encyclopedia, when Canada first entered the Second World War, a lot of the Japanese Canadians wanted to enlist and fight for Canada. But the BC government feared that if they were allowed to serve, then it would eventually mean giving them the right to vote, which they wanted to avoid. So, in March of 1941, Ottawa required all Japanese Canadians to register with the federal government, a registry that would eventually be used against them to declare them as enemy aliens.
Yeah, and when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941, things were about to get much worse for Japanese Canadians here, and that's when Government of Canada enacted the War Measures Act, and within 3 months the federal cabinet issued an order that stated all people of Japanese ancestry would be removed from a 100-mile zone inland from the Pacific coast.
And that's when the buildings at Hastings Park were expropriated by the Department of National Defense and became a sorting station for Japanese Canadians who were removed from the coast. And they would be held there until they could be sent east of the Rockies to work in prison camps and work farms. It was also the storage ground for all the vehicles seized from the Japanese Canadians.
Yes, Jen, this was a nightmare situation for Japanese Canadians who lived and worked along the coast for generations. We spoke with Mary Kitagawa, whose entire family was forced to leave their home.
I lived on an island called Salt Spring. I lived on a beautiful 7-acre farm that my parents had carved out of a forest, and they were running it as a business at that time. So we were living a really happy, profitable life. So when Pearl Harbor, was bombed, our lives turned upside down, and our journey into hell started at that time. There was a lot of rumors coming from Vancouver area that that we're going to be moved, or that my father was going to be taken away from us.
I mean, just imagine for a moment, fearing that one day your father would be taken away, but not knowing when that day would be. For Mary's family, that day was March 17th, 1942.
We saw an RCMP officer come barreling into our yard. We were all terrified. And my father said, I think the RCMP has come for me. The RCMP hollered, hurry up, hurry up. When my sister asked the RCMP officer if my father could sit in the cab because he wasn't that well, and he said, no Jap is going to sit in my cab. And so next thing we know, the truck drives away. Well, the three of us girls ran after the truck. We were crying and saying, Daddy, please come back. We chased that truck until it disappeared into a void.
As Mary continues her story, she recounts that on April 21st, 1942, her and the rest of her family received an order to leave their property and would be transported to Hastings Park in Vancouver. There, they would have to wait until they were told where they would be sent to next, outside of the 100-mile exclusion zone.
And so, as we were being led toward a building, my mother realized that it was a barn. We reluctantly walked into the building, and as we walked in, we could, like the smell of urine and feces, just rip through our noses. And then we could hear lots of noise because there were children crying, elderly women crying because they don't know what was happening to them, because their husbands, their sons were all not with her. And then we saw, it seems like acres of bunk beds, metal bunk beds, the black bunk beds. And then a lot of the women tried to find some privacy by hanging sheets and blankets so that, they'll have some privacy. But the spaces between the bunks were only wide enough for one person to walk by. So that's how close we were. And we were there among strangers. The only people we knew were from, people from the island. And that night, they didn't feed us. And we were also hungry.
Mary and her family would end up staying at Hastings Park for 2 weeks before they were sent to a work farm in Alberta. The good news is that they were eventually reunited with their father. But then they would have to move around to several different camps and farms throughout the years. It would be 7 years before they would be allowed to move back to BC and start their life from scratch.
Yeah, and Jen, when Mary reflects, she said it was more than just property that they lost.
We lost our community, we lost our education, we lost our future that we had planned. My grandparents lost their retirement, and my young parents lost the most productive years of their lives. I lost my friends. We had to start from the ashes. We had nothing. It was absolutely flat.
You know what's interesting, Jen, is that in our conversations with Mary and Daniel Takawa from the Interpretive Center Society about what happened at Hastings Park, they were both against the use of the word internment to describe the camps.
They said internment. You cannot intern your own citizens, but they did intern us because they relabeled us enemy aliens. So they interned enemies. Even if we were born here, had our citizenship, everything, we were enemies. So that's how they justified that word, internment. But I like to keep calling it imprisonment or incarceration, because that's what actually happened to us.
When the BC politicians and the BC Security Commission used this word, they were implying or promoting the notion that we were aliens and always had been aliens.
Yeah, it's really important to be mindful of the words we use when talking about sensitive topics because it has an effect on people who are impacted. So while the use of the word internment remains controversial within the Japanese community, it does seem that since the events of 1942 and the end of the Second World War, the Canadian government has taken steps to address the injustices that occurred. On September 22, 1988, the Japanese-Canadian Redress Agreement was signed. This agreement acknowledged the government's wrongful actions, pledged to ensure that the events would never recur, and recognized the loyalty of Japanese Canadians to Canada.
And I also saw that in May of this year, the BC government announced a $100 million initiative to address the lasting effect of the internment of Japanese Canadians in the province during the Second World War.
That only took 80 years, but I guess better super late than never. Well, let's turn to something a bit more forward-looking. When we spoke to Daniel Takawa, he mentioned that his organization received a $36,000 grant from BC Heritage to help build the Interpretive Center at Hastings Park. And he says the center will be located within the livestock barn where Mary and her family were held.
Yeah, and he spoke about the importance of the new Interpretive Center.
The audience is the generations to come, so that as a society we'll never forget and that it never happens again. because Hastings Park is probably one of the best examples of the injustices on one group of people done onto another group. And the kids and the generations coming up, they probably don't know, and it's important that they know.
Wow, yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing the new center, and I hope it won't take too much longer to be completed. But I hear maybe a few years yet. So, Ugi, I think you'll agree that what we took away from our conversations with Jim, Mary, and Dan is the importance of sharing this relatively unknown past in BC history. And I think Mary said it best when she said this.
Please tell our story. Please don't just keep it to yourself. Please share it. It's like a pebble. You throw the pebble in the water and how the ring gets wider and wider. I want that to happen with our story.
I don't think we could have said it any better. We want to thank our guests, Jim Kojima, Mary Kitagawa, and Daniel Tokawa, for sharing their stories with us and being so generous with their time.
And we want to thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune in for another episode of the Crow Chronicles. You can find us on Twitter at BCIT_journalism and on Instagram and Facebook at BCIT News. We are your hosts, Jen J.
and Ogilos Vonova. Enjoy the rest of your day.